William Carter Ross, one for the history books. Hey, Lab of Doom guy here. Last time, we went into some details about Nancy Ross, but this time, I want to get into some of the interesting details about her son, William Carter Ross. Let's get to it, shall we? Like I said, William Carter Ross's short bio from the Find a Grave website left a lot to unpack, so let's look at it again. Born a slave, William Carter Ross was the son of Nancy Ross and Morrison Green, a Virginia merchant and aristocrat. William became a Buffalo soldier in 1878 when he joined the U.S. Cavalry, mustering out in 1883 as a first sergeant. His first wife, Anschis, a Cheyenne Arapaho, gave him 4 children. Dusty Bull, who his father called Marcus Aurelius, died at age 4. Standing 20 died when she was 2, and the other 2 lived to adulthood, Margaret M. and Alexander Morrison. Anschis died, and William married her best friend Mina Schoonover Ashford, and they had 7 children. From Virginia Shade, an African-American history of Falmouth, Virginia. Since this book was mentioned twice in my previous research, I decided to procure a copy, and it's an interesting series of vignettes based on documents of the slavery and oppressive policies that occurred in this little section of Virginia. What an oddly specific premise to a book that just happens to be conveniently relevant to my genealogy research. This background info makes it all the more compelling to find out how this poor little slave boy became a successful farmer, marrying first into an Indian family and then into a white family in Oklahoma Indian Territory. So I wanted to follow the trail a little. Well, according to his grave, he was born September 7th, 1856. In the last video, we saw W.C. grew up living with his parents, Alexander Morrison and Nancy Ross, in Stafford, Virginia, according to the 1860 slave census and the 1870 census. Since the Civil War had not ended until 1865 and Emancipation Proclamation wasn't issued until 1863, William Carter's early years, at least the first 7, would have been officially under slave status. Whether he was treated like a slave under the rule of his father/slave owner is hard to say. As we established in the last video, it appears that WC's relationship was more familial than servant, though. Now, believe it or not, WC, he was apparently an educated man for the time. His father, Alexander Morrison Green, attended VMI, and in spite of not graduating, apparently acted as attorney for his brothers and sisters at times, according to some documents, and it's believed Alex taught Nancy and all his children to read and write, which I hear was against the law at the time in the South. It seems that William Carter Ross spent most of his formative years farming through the Green family-owned farmland in Stafford County. We don't know how much of a childhood he would have had to enjoy between the war and the social upheaval surrounding it, but the next piece of documentation I come across is this register of U.S. military enlistments from 1878. From what I can see here, William Carter Ross from Stafford, Virginia, enlisted in Baltimore, Maryland in 1878 at the ripe age of 21. The physical description shows that his hair and eyes were black, his complexion was, quote, mulatto. He stood at 5'10" and 3/4 inches. My understanding, that was pretty big for back then, and the rest of the heights on the page kind of back that up. Marked down for his trade was farmer, as we had established. He grew up on the family farm. I don't blame William Carter for leaving home in a post-Civil War South, although I'm sure he would have been handy on the family farm, a job being a luxury in the post-war South. He also would have surely led a life as a second-class citizen, marred by the prejudices of that time. Military service offered steady pay, benefits, the chance at education, and possibly even rights that were not available to him in Virginia at that time. Even if you consider the potential danger of the Indian Wars, it seems like it might have been an easy choice for a young William Carter Ross. According to this document, they sent him to the 9th Cavalry, a group reserved for black enlisted men under white officers. You probably have heard of them, the Buffalo Soldiers from your history books, and that is precisely where he ended up. He served in Company K of the 9th Cavalry in 1878. The Wikipedia entry on Buffalo Soldiers says this of the 9th Cavalry between 1878 and 1883. The regiment went to New Mexico Military District, which covered parts of New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas, and participated in the Apache Wars from 1875 to 1881. Headquarters were at Fort Union, while in New Mexico, duties included constructing barracks and stables, caring for the horse herds, scouting for hostile natives, escorting the mails, surveying uncharted land, and constructing roads. That service also included the Battle of Tularosa with Cherokee Apache warriors led by Victorio in May 1880. The Battle of Fort Tularosa was an Apache attack repulsed by Company K, one of the few attacks that was not an ambush by Victorio and his band of Apaches fighting to stay off reservations. In it, 25 Buffalo soldiers held off an attack of roughly 100 Apache with no losses. That seems like some high-stress material right there. From the Wikipedia references, it appears that a lot of William Carter's time would have been spent hunting down Victorio and working to build up some minimal infrastructure for the wilderness. In Virginia Shade, they report William Carter served in Animas City, Colorado Territory, in the Ute Campaign in 1879, and in different parts of the New Mexico Territory. This sounds like it would have been a response to the Meeker Massacre, an incident that occurred in late September 1879 between a group of Utes, U.S. government agents, and settlers. Turns out that if you send a bunch of people to settle on other people's land, opportunity for conflict abounds. It eventually resulted in the U.S. government passing the Ute Removal Act in 1880, pressuring the Utes to relocate by force. Based on this, it appears that whether William Carter Ross was fighting Victorio or the Utes or building up infrastructure, it appears his task was to help pave the way for the swarms of settlers already making their way west and imposing the government's will on the native tribes in order to foster the economic development of the West. It is hard to tell if any one soldier took part in a particular battle, like the previously mentioned Battle of Tularosa, but according to U.S. military records, I found another document mentioning William Carter's company in brief. In 1881, there were a number of engagements. In Carrizo Canyon, 19 men of Troop K under Captain Parker, 2 men killed. Apparently, this was the Battle of Carrizo Canyon. This was an ambush of troops out hunting down Nana, the Apache successor to the fallen Victorio. The battle resulted in 2 of the Buffalo soldiers of William Carter's company getting Medals of Honor, Sergeant Thomas Shaw and Sergeant George Jordan. So it was probably quite a harrowing ordeal. So it sounds likely William Carter probably saw some fighting against Native Americans. It's hard to tell exactly how much, considering the documentation that I've come across only mentions the Medal of Honor winners. But based on photos of Troop K from the 9th Cavalry from a decade later, 19 or 25 men appear to be the majority of the troop, meaning it was likely that 1st Sergeant Ross was likely to have been in the thick of all of it. Perhaps luckily for him, the 9th Cavalry was transferred to Fort Riley, Kansas in 1881. Wikipedia goes on. After warfare and work in New Mexico, the Army transferred the 9th Cavalry to Indian Territory and assigned them the job of preventing boomers from illegally moving from Kansas to Oklahoma. In the 1880s, more than 2,000 boomers filtered in from various points along the border, requiring the constant attention of 6 companies of black cavalrymen. African American soldiers drove out the majority of those already in Oklahoma, but as a result, racism exploded. Well, maybe they weren't so lucky to transfer after all, after reading that. Wikipedia continues. The imposing and thankless task of driving boomers from Indian Territory ended for the 9th Cavalry in June 1885. Among other feats, Buffalo soldiers in Indian Territory assisted local authorities and federal marshals, escorted civilians, stagecoaches and freighters, guarded railroad construction workers and mail carriers, forestalled boomers, chased robbers, horse thieves and cattle rustlers, attempted pacification of Indians, and provided protection for Indians in Indian Territory. William Carter Ross mustered out in 1883 out of Fort Supply, Oklahoma. He didn't take long to start settling down. He married Anschis, a daughter of the Setchestashi tribe, the Cheyenne Arapaho, by 1886. Now, I suppose this was somewhat of a loophole exploitation. You see, according to Wikipedia, in March 2nd, 1889, Congress passed an amendment in the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871, which provided for the creation of homestead settlements in the unassigned lands to be known as Oklahoma Territory. President Grover Cleveland announced that the Oklahoma lands would be opened on April 22nd via land run. That means William Carter Ross, after years of fighting Native Americans and kicking Sooners out of Oklahoma for the Army, turned around and married a Native American and became a Sooner himself. He was there before the land rush. I'm guessing this was loophole exploitation, as I'm guessing he was allowed to set up shop early, due to the fact that he married into the tribe and settled on tribal lands. This means he beat the land rush into the state. I'm sure that paid off in more ways than one. They settled in the area of El Reno, Oklahoma, outside of the established Fort Reno, a place he likely worked out of in his cavalry days, in what was then officially Cheyenne Arapaho territory. Now, native claims to the territory were wiped out by a proclamation by President Benjamin Harrison in 1892, but it didn't matter to W.C. Being a former farmer turned Buffalo soldier turned settler, married to a Native American may have been the best character class you could roll at that time and place. He got acquainted with the natives and had the land scouted out as a soldier. He got to settle early by marrying into the tribe, and he got to stay because he was a settler. He grew up farming, so half the learning curve of homesteading was already in his toolset. Everyone else had the government pushing them around, and this man got to be above it all. He had come a long way from being a slave boy on a plantation in Stafford, Virginia. Just look at this photo of him at the time. Dude was a bad mamma jamma, hard as nails. Looked like he could tear the ears off a gun dart, that's for sure. And he would need all that tenacity and skill he had been grinding for years to build up to succeed in the Oklahoma Territory. As seen in this Indian census roll from June 30th, 1892, W.C. and Anschutz already had 2 children, Standing 20 and Dusty Bull. Here we see Anschutz with a young Dusty Bull, or Marcus Aurelius as W.C. liked to call him. Unfortunately, W.C.'s luck was no match for the mortality of the times. Both of his children died late in 1892. Anschutz had 2 more children, Maggie and Alexander Morrison, in the next few years, before she herself also died in 1896. This left William Carter with 2 children under the age of 4 to take care of out on the frontier. Being out on the frontier in the 19th century meant the Ross family were at the mercy of germs and disease, and they paid for it dearly. Being a single parent nowadays is no easy task, but I can only imagine the hardship that a single father would endure in the Oklahoma Territory at that time. As a fortuitous circumstance, Anschutz's best friend, Mina Schoonover, a Caucasian woman who spent a lot of time with the tribe, had recently become single. I'll get into Mina's backstory in another video, but Mina just became a widow about the same time W.C. became a widower. Now, as in my last genealogy video, far be it from me to judge people in hard times in a different century, but apparently they were fond enough of each other to see that they could make an arrangement work together and got married that same year, ostensibly for the sake of the children. To give you an idea of how fond they were of each other, Anschutz died in February. They were married in April, and their first child, Lucy, was born in December, all in 1896. I am no obstetrician, but if we do the math, that baby was likely conceived in early March, less than a month from her best friend's death. Maybe they didn't get together for the sake of the children. I guess a real best friend just really knows how to get your husband over your tragic premature demise. Let's just say that when Alexander Morrison Green came all that way to Oklahoma to sign that marriage certificate, Mina may have been in baby bump territory. Interesting what kind of dirt you can dig up on people over 130 years ago. Scandalous. I don't know how controversial this would have even been, though. Was W.C. expected to mourn for a year or so, or was he expected to move on because the children need a mother in 1896? Was Mina really Anschutz's best friend, or was she really W.C.'s best friend? Obviously, having children outside of marriage was even more frowned upon in 1896 than it is today, but would they have married if Mina didn't get pregnant? Well, maybe they would have. The couple went on to have 6 more children in short order. I'd like to think that it wasn't that much of a marriage of convenience if you got that kind of output. Let's just say, just shooting the breeze here, let's say W.C. didn't marry Mina right away and she didn't get pregnant right away. If she stayed around to take care of the children, the optics of it all, a grown woman living with a grown man to help take care of his house, it would easily add up to, quote, living in sin in the mind's eye of the neighbors of the time. So I suppose either way, they took the most prudent course of action because there was no winning in that scenario if they were that fond of each other. So they did what they saw fit. William Carter spent his years farming and working cartage with his large family while developing their homestead. In the book, The Indian's Last Fight, or The Dull Knife Raid, which is available on Project Gutenberg, the author reports this of the Ross family. Mina afterward married W.C. Ross, who owns a large tract of land adjoining the flourishing city of El Reno, the Queen City of the North Canadian. Miss Ross is today the mother of a large family of sons and daughters who are a credit to her and an honor to the state of Oklahoma. Even today, she delights in telling how she used to enjoy riding out on a bronco, lassoing a wild antelope or deer, dragging it back to camp amid the cheers and acclamations of the whole tribe. W.C. Ross, through his foresight and good business management, succeeded in locating his family allotments in close proximity to the city of El Reno, as I have mentioned above, and his location proved to be one of the most valuable in the Canadian Valley. By its increase in value due to its location and by his knowledge of farming, he has placed himself and his family above the reach of want. He is educating his sons and daughters in the Catholic school of El Reno, and they have proved themselves good students. Their native talents developed in such surroundings show that they are or will be capable of fulfilling the duties of responsible positions in the very near future. Sounds like William Carter Ross did pretty darn good for himself. He took his chances and played a smart game of life. He certainly wasn't dealt the easiest hand, but he did excellent with the hand that he got. And if you want to get a bit cheesy with me, isn't that what the American dream is all about? It isn't about getting rich or turning the world on its head, but turning your chances into something special, leaving a mark, making a better life for yourself and your children than could have been. And I definitely think WC did much better than if he stayed on the family plantation in Virginia in a post-Civil War South. William Carter Ross died at the age of 58 in 1915. His epitaph reads, "Born in Virginia." I don't know if that is merely a statement of fact or a testament to the odds he had overcame in his life. I like to think it was the latter. Either way, thanks for joining me again in my dive into the ancestry rabbit hole. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more. In the meantime, be kind to one another.